Right.
Thank you, Julie.
Great. Well, everyone, I think we will get started. Since it's 2:01, we want to definitely be mindful of the time together. So we do have our friends on Zoom. So welcome everybody on Zoom in person, and we'll see who else can join us. But I'm Amy Lannon, and I direct the writing program. So the campus writing program, we are all about writing intensive courses, as many of you know. So definitely what we're thinking about today is where we are using writing in our teaching. So whether or not it's writing intensive, if your class is involving writing in one way or another, I think you'll hopefully find some things you can use from this. But I am coming from this work not just as director of the writing program, but also as a WI instructor for many, many years. And so really thinking about what that means, you know, what this time in technology means to me. So Christy, introduce yourself, then Julie, and M, then Maha.
Awesome. I'm Christy Goldsmith. I'm the Associate Director of the Campus Writing Program, and I'm faculty in English education. So I'm coming to this thinking about the K-12 world. I teach future secondary English teachers and also the role as helping the writing intensive program. Thanks for coming. Julie.
Hi, I am Julie Burt. I am the coordinator with the Campus Writing Program. My background is actually with science ed, so I come more from a animal science writing perspective.
And there's M with the great Van Gogh background.
Hey everyone, my name is Em Stagg. I am the administrative person for the campus writing program, as well as for Dr. Tori Mondelli. So if you have any questions about events or scheduling or registering for events, just feel free to send me an email.
And we also today have Maha Karim, and she is going to be kind of our in-person Zoom to connect also with Julie. So that way we've got some people helping. So any of you on Zoom, if you have questions with sound, if you have questions on anything, use chat, unmute, and we'll try to make sure wherever you are today, we can answer questions. So we are wanting to jump into then, gosh, Christy, it's.
Told you, whatever, if we tested it for this way, this direction, go this way.
So we are here to think about session 2 of the,
Here, I got you for this.
Okay.
Sorry, I think it's
Wow.
the recording.
okay.
Try again.
Recording doesn't
Try
like
again.
it. So AI in the Academy, implementing meaningful writing assignments. So in chat, for those of you on Zoom, if you put your name, department, and one word to capture your thoughts today, or feelings about ChatGPT, let's just see where we are. And because we're a nice small group, let's go around the room and hear who's here. So start.
Hi, I'm Emily Sharbat. I'm in the Department of Human Development and Family Science. One word is curious.
Curious.
I'm Dr. Kevin Brown. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Theater. My word for today is incredulous.
Okay. You just kind of want to know more, but we'll come back to that. All right.
Hi, I'm Amy Simons. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a professor in the School of Journalism, and my one word is threatened.
Laura Johnston, also in the journalism school, and my word is concerned.
I'm Liz Duplessis. I'm an instructional designer in the e-learning department, and I'm unsurprised.
I'm Cheryl Hall. I'm the director of composition in the English department, and I think my word is challenged.
Okay. And Maha, can you just shout out some of the chat
Yeah.
words that people have?
Yeah, so Bill Falk is biochemistry. The word is problematic. Alexandria Lewis, School of Social Work. One word is help. Maureen says she is curious too. Another person, Guy Wilson, says curious. Scott Christensen, management, says curious as well. So I have a lot of curious here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good.
And then one is change.
All right. Well,
We so our lives have been very interesting this year, as I'm sure your alls have too, those of you in writing studies as well, because these two articles came out in December. The College Essay is Dead and the End of High School English within 3 days of each other in the Atlantic, and then Amy and I got them 18 times a day from every department on campus, right? Because everyone's very concerned. I think that threatened is a key word there. So we looked at those headlines and then I wanted to know some more current headlines. So this one, abstracts written by ChatGPT, Fool Scientists, is an article in Nature. It's recent and it's a really interesting, you should Google it. It's a really interesting article about how, I think what we're here to talk about today, right? Like, what if we can't tell if this was written by ChatGPT? Like, what are the implications? And then one of my favorite scholars, I don't know if you all read Tressie McMillan Cottom, but she's a sociologist at University of North Carolina. And she wrote this great piece about voice and the way that tech can't totally do what we want our students to do because the voice isn't there. It's only like almost voice. And I think it's really fascinating. So I encourage you to read that.
So here's the however though, because we know we've been surrounded and bombarded and threatened by a lot of these headlines. We want to think today though about, when considering these things, when we are assigning writing, using writing in our teaching, for what purpose? Why are we doing it? What other options might we have when we are teaching with text, both reading and writing? And I also want to throw out that there is not one way that we are going to talk about for how we teach writing or write. One of the things I love about the work we do in the writing program is we work across campus, across the curriculum. So we get to see the wonderful nuances of writing and the way it works. But when we are doing workshops like this, and again, I want us to all know that we're all learning this together and we are all bringing in different areas of expertise. So some of the things we share may or may not work for you, and that's okay. At the end though, maybe all of us can think about something we may tweak in an assignment or something we may do in another way we might revise our own teaching. It comes down though to, in writing across the curriculum, we are looking at two main pillars of work that we're about. One is that we want to know that a writing intensive course, or when writing is used, it's not about reaching that 20 pages or some magic quantity. It is really about the quality. It is about having complexity within the assignment so that critical thinking develops. And secondly, we want to think about how students are learning to write in your disciplines by working with you as the disciplinary experts. So you are the ones to think about those problems that are unique to this time and this place for your discipline. And if your assignments are helping to do those two things, then hopefully whether a student is thinking of a ChatGPT option or not, or some other, that you're finding ways to make those assignments reach your students and engage them. Throughout the work that we do, both today, but all throughout the year, we do a lot of our work from this book by John Bean and Dan Milzer, and it's called Engaging Ideas. So I'm trying to think where to go for my Zoomers to see this. Julie's going to also put in chat a link to, you can access this book through Ellis Library. We also have copies at the Conley House, and the first 3 people here who grab one can take them home as yours to keep. But those books are filled with ideas on developing that critical thinking in your writing instruction and assignments. So I want us to then begin with, why do we write? Why do we even have writing intensive requirements for graduation? Why is this even a thing? So I want to share with you an excerpt that I've used in my teaching for a long time, and it was kind of a fun thing to pull back out of my my repertoire of materials. It's an essay by Terry Tempest Williams, and it's called Why I Write. And those of you on Zoom, you have a link that Julie's putting in chat for you. Those of you here in the room, you have an actual copy you can take. I'm just going to read a few lines. But this is what Terry Tempest Williams says as to why I write. She says, it's just after 4 a.m. I was dreaming. And then I began reciting in my sleep why I write. I write to make peace with the things I cannot control. I write to create fabric in the world that often appears black and white. I write to discover. I write to uncover. I write to correspond with my friends. I write as a daily act of improvisation. I write because it creates my composure. I write to remember. I write to forget. I write with the patience of melancholy in winter. I write because it allows me to confront that which I do not know. I write as an act of faith. I write as an act of slowness. And I'm going to invite you into some of that slowness here for a bit. Those of you in the room, notice that there are journals, paper journals, and a pen that says why I write. So either on a journal, or if you want to use your devices, those of you on Zoom also invited to grab some paper or some kind of a place on one of your devices to do a bit of writing. We're going to spend maybe not 5 minutes, but a few minutes writing ourselves to the prompt of why do I have my students write? We just heard Terry Tempest Williams, why she writes. So why do I have my students write? So I'm going to pause in a moment. Now, I want to put my teacher hat on for a minute and share with you, when I do this in class with students, I'm pretty firm about my guidelines. Because otherwise I've learned from my own research and experience, if I don't set guidelines, it becomes the time to take a break, check my phone, check my email, talk to my neighbor. So here are my guidelines I'm sharing with you now. So we'll follow them now, but also this might be something in class writing you may want to use yourself. This is your time where you have permission to avoid distractions. You can ignore those distractions and text messages because only 3 or 4 minutes is going to be okay. You write without worrying about errors. Doesn't matter if a word is spelled correctly or not at this point. You're going to write on the topic, but writing often leads you to new ideas or frustrations or things you need to write out. Go ahead and do that. You do not need to write fast. It's not a race, but you do need to keep writing because that's where the real important work happens, is when you keep forcing those words on the page. And if you get really blocked, you've written your 2 sentences, you have nothing more to say, keep going and write about then why this is hard to do. Why is it hard to write? Yes, definitely. And we will also be happy to share all the slides with you. All right, any questions before we stop and write? All right, Zoomers, your opportunity to enjoy time to sustain yourself with written word and not a screen for a little bit of time. All right, let's write. Would you find a good place to end that thought? And I'm going to ask those of you on Zoom to go ahead and put in chat, at least one idea of what you wrote, of why you would have your students write. And then I'm going to ask for in the room here to go ahead and just shout out if you've got an example for us. So we're going to start at Christie's table. Anybody want to shout out why you have students write?
To apply course materials.
To apply course materials.
To reflect.
To help you think.
Next table. And you can pass, but if you want to shout out.
I said it's how we can, in my discipline anyway, it's how we convey important information, even if it means we're doing it on a variety of platforms. So you might write the script for radio.
Write a script for which?
For radio,
Radio.
but you're writing.
Writing is crafting without a physical mess.
I love it, crafting without a physical mess. Okay.
It's an important life skill across disciplines.
Cheryl, anything to add?
Oh, lots of things, but I'll say to let them hear their own voices and feel them becoming more fluent.
Molly, you want to share a couple on there?
To engage with the course content, process information, and make meaning of what they are reading. This is one. Initial writing allows a good beginning for class discussion on what everyone has read. People presumably thought about. And then one more, I have students write, so they have more practice writing and to synthesize and reflect on an experience.
Okay. So these are the kind of reasons for us to remember when we're assigning writing. Is this reflected in how we're doing that? If we want our students to experience writing in these ways, what kind of assignments are we creating for that to happen? And so as we go through this, I want us to think about when we study writing, it does do that writing to learn because it has these wonderful qualities. Writing is generative. As we write, we start thinking of new things. And we see that even in when we are writing our to-do list. As we're writing, we're thinking, oh yes, I need to do this. Oh, and I need to do this because it's got our brain kind of thinking in that. Same thing if it's a grocery list. So writing generates ideas. So if we aren't writing, we're not going to generate those ideas. But do our students know that? Maybe, but probably not. So this might be a good thing to share with students. Writing, I love this idea. It is our thinking made visible. We can see it, we can work with it. It's no longer just trapped inside. It's something we can work with. We all know it's a record of our experience. And we even, I think, heard that and reflected in some of what you were sharing. It's varied in form. As we heard even what you shared about what your students write, we're hearing even how it is varied in purpose, in form. And it is a very engaging way to learn. And I love what Melzer and Bean say in their book. Quite simply, writing is a process of doing critical thinking and a product that communicates the results of critical thinking. So I don't think we need to sell any of ourselves on this. Hopefully, we're all like, yep, this is good point, Amy. This is what writing to learn is about, and it is important. And William Zinsser also in this quote really reminds us again why we're even here, why we have writing intensive courses, that writing is a way we think and learn. And I was pausing, but I think I will read it out loud because just to make sure on the recording we have this too. As a writer, I had made clear to myself some subject I had previously known nothing about by just putting one sentence after another, by reasoning my way in sequential steps to its meaning. I thought of how often the act of writing even the simplest document, a letter for instance, had clarified my half-formed ideas. Writing and thinking and learning were the same process. And William Zinsser is one of those journalism person, but also a great leader at the start of writing across the curriculum. So we like to think of his words to guide us. And that leads us into teaching tip number 1. We're going to go through some teaching tips today. So in class writing, even online writing, hopefully it worked even for our Zoomers, because we definitely do this in our Zoom workshops. But in class writing can do wonders. You're walking out of here with maybe a half page of writing that you did here with some guidelines. So what might that look like in your classroom? Now, I will say as far as naming it, I like to call it a free write, because even though it's not free, I told you had to keep writing. You're freely to go though into some new directions. And you're free because you're in an informal situation, you're not being judged by what you wrote. Some people like to call it a quick write because it's just going to take a couple minutes. Some people might call it a break write. And in the middle of, let's say, a lecture or a lab or something, we're going to stop, everybody grab your notebook, start writing for 2 minutes. Another way to do that is a layered writing. And that's where I love this when I'm a student, when the instructor does this, because let's say there's a longer sequence of either a lesson, a lab, whatever, lecture. And about every 10 or 15 minutes to pause, grab your notes or your, on your computer and start writing to whatever prompt the instructor is giving you to help you stop and reflect on and build on what was that last little 10 or 15 minutes doing. A way to engage the brain, get students actually writing some things that then down the road, as they might build that into a longer piece, they've got some words already down there. Exit slips, and Julie Burt probably even has her stacked with her because she's been carrying them around for 2 days from her 150 students. At the end of class, a note card. Julie, what was the prompt you gave them?
I was just asking them what was the key takeaway they took from our guest speaker on the previous class.
Thank you. And then from that, what are you doing with all that information?
I am curating it to kind of lead our discussion sections on Friday, so I kind of know what they've already gotten and what they've probably missed.
And Amy, can I jump in too?
Yeah.
I saw a bit of one of Tim's comments that I thought was really, really good. Tim wrote that the problem is students often perceive writing as a summative assessment. And so this informal writing to learn is kind of antithetical to what they see writing being in college. And I absolutely agree. And I think that that's why creating these structures and doing it often, like the routines often. So I think Julie Burt students know they have to write something when they leave class every day. My students know they have to write something when they come into class every day. And it's always connected to the reading or what they were supposed to do before class. So I think once you sort of establish those structures and then repeat them, it helps to break that down. And I'll say, this is one of those informal things. We do these at the start of every class, and then our other assignments are the more summative pieces. So I think that's a good point to make.
Are there any, and I don't know, maybe we'll get into this later, but are there any recommendations on how to apply some of those teaching tip ones in asynchronous environments?
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to throw out an idea and then I would love others to as well. In an asynchronous environment, I might use some of this informal writing where when I'm writing up, let's say maybe some steps into a longer piece of writing, I may ask them for the very first one, I want you to submit either on the discussion board or however I'm collecting writing from them. I want you to time yourself. And if it's asynchronous, I might say, I want you to write nonstop for 10 minutes. Set your timer.
Or time the assignment?
Yep. And then that
Because
way,
I wouldn't trust the student to actually set a timer.
well, it could be kind of doing more, I think it was
I mean,
Bradbury who would
yeah.
say, I
You
want
could
you to
use,
write.
you could make it so from the minute they open it, they only have 10 minutes to complete or it auto completes.
Or you could put a little video timer in there and they can just click it right on the
Yeah,
screen.
yeah.
That's still a lot more trust, given what we're here talking about than.
I mean, that's where, again, in an asynchronous, that's
Yeah.
where I think us to consider the whole world of artificial intelligence,
Yeah.
text generation from that. So that's
Yeah.
where, again, we may have some great advice for us here on Zoom too. But I guess I would also, before I would start engaging students too much into that, I would want to really have some conversations about why we're even doing any of this. What would be the purpose of that? Because otherwise, yeah, why not just put in the prompt to ChatGPT and see what it gives you? But thoughts on that from anybody on Zoom? Julie or Maha, do you want to, or anybody want to unmute? I didn't catch that.
Yeah, what did it?
She says they won't follow the time.
Uh-huh.
Can you tell in a Google Doc when someone's started and stopped, like in the
Tiny history of the document?
You know, and you can
I'm trying to think of the
screenshot it so it
timestamps on there.
shows, like, you know, shows.
Edit history. So you're gonna go see what edits people have made and they tell you what times they made the edits. I don't think it keeps a running track of how long they've been in the
I
document.
think the
but
key
you
is like,
can-
it's less important for me how much they actually spend that they produce a paragraph. Like what, if it takes some students 10 minutes to produce a paragraph and some 2, that's fine. I think that I like to have them put the paragraph they produce and then highlight the sentence that is like the most brilliant point in that paragraph. And then I'll ask them to write on that. So mine is sort of like the loop writing. So I think some probably take longer. I teach asynchronous classes. Some probably take longer. Some probably have copied and pasted from something before, but I'm forcing them to like find an idea or create an idea. I don't even care, I guess, if they use ChatGPT to get an idea. But what I really focus on is that sentence that they highlight and then what they produce from that. So I think it kind of depends what your outcome is, you know.
Alex says I incorporate engagement activities in my death, grief, and loss class, and it is worth points.
I don't know if anybody can hear me. I like to use a little writing assignment at the start in order to prompt discussion and thereby turn the class into a group event as opposed to a single student interaction with a single teacher.
Yeah, thank you, Ted.
Flower has her hand raised. Amy Flower, would you like to go ahead?
I was just going to say that the conversation about timing versus not timing reminds me that things that work in person, maybe not, you know, they may not translate directly to online spaces. And so I think in the asynchronous environment, much like we have already shared, maybe it's not setting a timer, maybe it is intentionally building in discussion questions like a learning log or a journal, a weekly reflection, just kind of layering in those pieces and making them worth complete or incomplete, as was also shared in the chat, just to structure that expectation that students are writing informally to generate ideas and that kind of thing.
Thank you, Flower. Right. What's on the screen here would just be a few other applications of writing to learn strategies that, especially following more of an informal, maybe not even a graded, but could be graded kind of approach to using writing in that way. These are taken from Bain and Melzer pages 35 to 37. You'll see several pages of ideas there. So all of this, though, does connect to our writing intensive guidelines. And so I want to just highlight this particular section that we pulled. So asking ourselves, how do the writing activities clearly connect to the desired student outcomes and modes of assessment? A writing intensive course, because it exposes students to live questions in an academic discipline, provides an excellent opportunity to develop critical thinking and field-specific expertise. In WI courses, the writing, teaching, and course content interact to deepen student learning. So an instructor, I want to keep thinking about in my class, what are those live questions? And what is that field-specific expertise that I want my assignments to help? Now I'm going to turn it over to Julie, because connected to teaching tip 1 is thinking about then how do we start moving this into what we're putting on the assignments and syllabi. So Julie, and we may need to turn up your volume a little bit.
Yeah, I can move my notebook that I've taken notes in out of the way, and that might help. So I wanted to share with you all something that we do in my class where there's quite a bit of writing. Can you hear me okay?
Can you hear?
I like to include on my syllabus why I'm asking my students to write. So you've already brainstormed reasons for why your students write. So just communicating that to my students, I have found has been really powerful. And I think it can really help when we talk about artificial intelligent writing, in that if they understand why it's useful that they actually do the writing themselves, then they're more likely to actually pick it up and do it themselves. And that includes WI is a graduation requirement, right? So just telling you got to write a lot because it's a graduation requirement is not exactly convincing reason for them to actually do the writing themselves. I also do this in my assignments, including a purpose and learning outcomes with the assignment, so that students see what I hope they're getting out of it and what they're going to learn as they go through these writing conversations. And then at other times, I just explain to my students why I write. What do I use writing for? How, as a scientist, I use writing in my research, and why it matters to their learning, and how I've improved myself as a writer. So just explaining a lot of those whys and reasoning to my students has been fairly successful for me, and I think it'll be really helpful as we talk more about this artificial intelligent writing. Go ahead, Amy. I really appreciate this quote from Janet Imming. The one reason why we write is using literacy to support our content learning. We can show our higher cognitive functions such as analysis and synthesis, which we hope all of our students are doing, and developing their support system of verbal language and written language. It involves the hand, the eye, the brain. That's why I always encourage my students to take physical notes as much as possible, because of the research that supports that. And it's just a multi-representational mode of learning. But Writing intensive courses, we have a long list of potential learning objectives that you can feel free to pull from for reasons why we would have our students writing in these courses. Things like distinguishing among fact, inference, and opinion, which I always find super important in my science ethics course. Articulating complex ideas and dealing with problems that have no simple solution. So we'll come back to this slide. I want to show you some examples of some sample statements I've pulled from some of our exemplary courses. For example, in one instructor syllabus, they explained to their students that the ability to communicate ideas and information on environmental issues is an important skill for both scientists and professionals. And they explained that the course is writing intensive, so they're going to develop their writing and communication skills through the use of media, which will be the focus of the course. Another instructor writes that for this assignment, responding to the text, so these short informal writings, gives the students a chance to connect with the text or explore the lack of connection with text. I know Em was writing about that for a minute in the chat about how as a student, oftentimes she didn't connect with the text and that the response is a starting point for all learning in the class. I think I have one more. And then the outcome of their outlining process, so they've broken down the writing process, is that they develop a thesis statement and plan their approach to writing their paper. And another benefit for students is to have some sense of how you want your paper to flow, so the ideas connect in a logical flow and discussion. So all things we already know as instructors, but taking the time to communicate it to our students can be really powerful in working with our students. Go ahead. So I want you to take about a minute or two, and I promise you this is the only homework I'm going to give you from here, is I want you to go ahead and reread what you wrote at the beginning of this session. And I want you to write for just a minute or two, how can you take that language and add it to your syllabus or a course assignment to help students understand why you're asking them to do what you're doing? All right, I hope you've had a chance to jot down a few ideas of ways that you can explain to your students why it's important. You don't even have to explain that they shouldn't use artificial intelligence, just explaining why the process is important for them, I think would help. Would anybody like to share what ideas they came up with for adding to their assignments or their syllabus? And feel free.
I really like this, Julie. I like this activity because I was thinking of the one assignment in my most recent evaluations that students were like, I think you like it was a neat assignment, but we didn't really get it and it was super overwhelming. And I was like, fair, it was brand new. And so I was writing out why I chose that assignment that was very open structure. It didn't have a lot of like requirements, why that was what I did. And I think that this will help them understand why they're kind of overwhelmed to start and how like you just have to trust the process. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks. I mean, I actually did it too, and I realized I have a why on the big assignment, but the individual steps don't have a purpose. other than what I might have told them in person, but there's nothing in writing that says why they need to reference list or outline or do a first or second draft. So I think I might actually use this for my class as well. I appreciate that Alexandria was telling us that they already include a purpose in every assignment in the syllabus, so way ahead of the game there.
Alexander says I include a purpose for every assignment in the syllabus.
So we're on to teaching tip 3 that we hope is connected in some way. I've been thinking a lot about how the threats that ChatGPT provide us really are opportunities for us to make better writing assignments. And I don't think we have to like reinvent the wheel. I think we can just tweak writing assignments to make them more specific and more localized and more engaging with new media. And I think that these small tweaks are all we really need to do. So every time I get overwhelmed by it, I remind myself, we're not reinventing the wheel, we're making these small tweaks. The first tweak that I really think is useful is thinking about ways to engage students in the process of writing, assessing and giving feedback along the way. Now, I know that when I say giving feedback along the process of writing, I mean, our journalist friends are experts at this, and they also spend a whole lot of time doing it, right? Other disciplinary faculty may be like, I just don't have the time to give detailed feedback on every step of the writing process. And so when we say feedback in writing studies, we mean a variety of feedback. So we might mean students are working on drafting maybe an outline in class, and you walk by and look over their shoulder and give suggestions, like that's feedback. Or maybe students submit a paragraph of their first draft and you give really detailed feedback on that paragraph. I like to do that with like the intro because it's so important. Or maybe like the paragraph where I say, submit the paragraph that is the most important to your argument. And I look at that paragraph specifically. So when we say giving feedback along the way, I don't want you to think that that means lots of detailed feedback and taking more time, but really targeting your feedback to the part of the process. So I know that most of us here are writing intensive instructors or have been at some point in time. And so I suspect that you already have early draft elements like proposals and outlines, source summary and comments on how you'll use them, the old annotated bibliography thing. But maybe thinking about ways that you can take those early draft elements and have students bring them to class or use them on the discussion board or engage with it early in the process, because then they can't just throw something into the AI generator and end up with a full draft if you're forcing them to provide a few sources. Can they get that from the generator? Sure, but then they still have to think about it, right? You're forcing them to provide a thesis statement or an argument statement. Again, they can generate that, but then they're going to have to think about it and talk about it in class. So thinking about ways to break that up and engage it in class, and they don't want to look silly among their peers, right? This is what we know about humans of all ages, is that their peers hold them more accountable sometimes than we do. A tool that we support here at Mizzou fairly recently to help with this, combining research and writing, is PowerNotes, and we'll send these slides out, but that's linked to just powernotes.com if you're in the room. And then the tutorial is just on the Mizzou Library YouTube page. So if you go to Mizzou Library's YouTube and type in PowerNotes, you'll see me in Zoom World and my colleague Kimberly Muller over there. But PowerNotes is basically an online way to reproduce the old note card system. You know, when we were in school, because I can tell how old some of us are in here, we wrote our little sources on the note cards. I wrote my master's thesis. I can't believe it. Wrote our little sources on the note cards and made big stacks of note cards and then moved the note cards around, right? That's how we built our research paper. PowerNotes does that, but they do it online. So students actually can pull up any PDF or website from the library, peer-reviewed sources or outside sources, annotate it in real time, catch pieces of text. It immediately connects the source to that piece of text and put it into an outline sorted by topics. Then they can, export that outline in Microsoft Word or PDF or Excel and work with it and make a paper from it. So we don't have the form of PowerNotes right now that is integrated with Canvas, but if you log into PowerNotes, create a new account with your Mizzou login, it will be free. You'll have unlimited projects and there's lots of export options. There's also group work options there. So if you have students writing groups, there's some really cool options there. So check it out. If you have questions about how to use this, let us know. But I like that because then it would be easy to assign a grade and some accountability to that early research process, which also will produce better papers. Not only will keep them away from ChatGPT, but it'll make better papers and better evidence, because we all know that many students find their sources the night before, and then they awkwardly cram them into the final paper, and then they're like, that does not fit in there. So this makes them think about it earlier on.
Is there a promo code we're supposed to use for that?
No, it will, when you create the account, it looks weird. It works with our secure sign-in system, but it doesn't look the same as it normally does. You have to create a new account and you have to use your Mizzou address, and it will recognize the suffix. So at system, at Missouri, at health.missouri. And once you create that account with whatever password you want, you just got to use your Mizzou address. It will connect it to all the things. You have to go through 87 tech steps to like make that happen and be approved. So I promise it's legit. Questions about that before I move on?
No, I mean, I teach journalism, so we do a lot of writing and assessing and feedback, like you said. I am not so worried about like my big picture assignments. I'm worried about some of the like little things that would be like, we are rewriting the leads for an audience. The purpose of this assignment is for you to consider your audience. And so you have to change this from a national story to a local story, where I give them a prompt. What I'm worried about, my concern is that they're going to put my prompt into ChatGPT and then spit out the social media post that I'm asking them to turn in for their assignment.
Yeah. Okay, so they talked about that in the sessions previous that I wasn't a part of. I just enjoyed watching. And I mean, I think that can be a learning opportunity itself. What they noted in the last session is that if they put in the same prompt, it produces pretty similar stuff. So I think that's typical plagiarism, like checking stuff. But the other thing is like, so what if they do that? Like, what if they do that? How can we still connect learning to that, right? So that's the cool thing that ChatGPT does is adjust for voice. And how can we learn from that? And how can we think about the appropriate voice connected to the appropriate social media? And do they need to be able to produce it or recognize it in the journalism world going forward? Like, these are philosophical questions, right?
Sure.
But I've been thinking a lot about if my students put it in there and it produces something, how can I force them to like prod that more? And I think you're right. The small assignments might be the ones that feel like throwaway assignments perhaps to them might be the ones that are more enticing. I do agree. I might have a few more suggestions later, but I think that's a legitimate concern. Something else that I think can be really useful because peers are the best pressure is thoughtful peer review. This is my soapbox and has been for the going on 5 years I've been at campus writing program. It was my job talk and I just keep talking about it. Peer review I know has gone really wrong for a lot of us. And I think that what ChatGPT can allow us to do, and maybe they bring in submissions from there and talk about it, is make peer review earlier in the process. So don't bring a full paper because students are overwhelmed reading their peers' full paper and they say, good job, or they fix 3 comments, right? Mm-hmm. But force peer review earlier in the process and have them really interrogate that with some very clear structures, some very clear questions. I give them like a set of 3 questions and 3 things to highlight. Like I get really, really specific with it and I'm happy to share any of that. So I think that can be useful. This sample that's linked here is the opposite. This is how I have, it's mostly grad students that I work with in this particular type of writing just because of the courses I teach. But this is where I teach students how to ask good questions about their writing because we all have grad students that are like, my advisor never gives me any feedback. And I'm like, well, do you ask the right questions? They know what to give you feedback on. So we talk a lot about how to ask good questions of your writing, which I think is important for everyone. And then they operationalize that via writing a letter to a classmate. So you can take that and make it undergrad focused. But I think even if you have them bring things from ChatGPT and do these questions and maybe compare it to what you would hope a model output could be, that could be a really great learning experience. One more thing I wanted to tell you is other ways to help students produce better writing is to really think of the disciplinariness of it. And I'll show you some examples from ChatGPT here in a second. But one thing it doesn't do very well right now, and everything I say is with an asterisk because it changes every day, right? This is a problem. It's like a whack-a-mole situation. But what it doesn't do very well right now is it doesn't make disciplinary specific things, right? And that is why students go to a research one institution like Mizzou and are in our programs because they're learning from the experts in the disciplines. So a way to make your assignments less hackable is to make them very, very specific. I've noticed, and we've seen this already in some case studies courses, Dr. Clarence Lowe has been teaching WI for a long time, sent us some tweaks he made, and he's making them use very specific evidence. They have to use these chapters in their textbook and these peer-reviewed articles to be selected for them. And they have to be incorporated in the disciplinary way of peace studies, humanities sort of way.
And these are online asynchronous courses?
They are online asynchronous courses. And once he's taught for a long time, so he just kind of changed the question a bit and made these source requirements. So as we'll see here in a second, ChatGPT is not great with sources. It can put some in there, especially popular ones. It makes some up. It made one of mine up, like a pretty famous textbook. I asked it to use and it totally made it up. So if we force these specific sources and ask them to cite them in a specific disciplinary way, that's one way we can tell, like, are they doing their work? Can they put it through ChatGPT, produce a paper, and then go back and add source information? Absolutely they can, but that sounds like learning to me. So like, I'm okay with that, right? You kind of have to like sort of think about what your goals of your assignments are. Secondly, I am really a proponent of disciplinary formats for displaying data and evidence. I like to have students create tables, and then the joke going around campus writing program is that I never read figures and tables in a paper. I just like skip the page. But I think that that's one way that especially our STEM folks can help students think about ways to write disciplinarily that ChatGPT can't produce that. Maybe it can produce parts, but it can't produce a really great figure or table. I've even been working with tables in social science stuff. So using tables from words, where I ask students to like identify themes and then put evidence with it and create a table. And so that's been pretty useful. And then finally, I teach media literacy courses. So I'm already sort of on this bandwagon always, but expanding the genres and modes of a science student writing. So maybe asking students to create a podcast or a radio script instead of creating a paper, right? Maybe asking students to create an infographic where they have to really think about the visual elements, or a mind map or an animation or something. So any ways we can engage them in new media, first of all, is engaging. They like to do that and they're actually very good at it. They consistently blow my mind. And also it requires them to think a lot about purpose and voice and what details they include and all those things we want them to think about. I'll pause for a second and see what ideas you have. Thoughts, pushbacks. Anyone fighting with me online, Julie? I welcome battles. I'm already like sweating because it's really warm in here, so let's do it. No. I also love that I always remember these things are recorded and it's gonna be on the internet somewhere.
No, they're pretty well with you there, Christy, about how peer review is very helpful, and that some former students share that they put more effort into their assignments when they know their peers are going to be looking at it.
I really appreciate hearing that that's across disciplines. I know my students are that way, so I'm glad to hear that. So it's cutting off. Oh, that's because I didn't move it back or something weird. Okay, so I read something recently. I've read so much about this, I don't know where it came from, that someone's like, oh, I know, it was the first session. Someone's like, what if I use ChatGPT to like create my objectives for my class? And I'm like, that sounds great, because I hate writing objectives. Like, what I want them to learn. So I teach a media literacy class for teachers. I put that question in ChatGPT a few days ago, and it produced these 7 objectives that are almost exactly like the 5 that I have. Like, there are phrases that are almost exactly the same as what I have. And I was like, oh, like that's powerful, right? That's interesting. So what I've noticed is it does really good. It does really well when it's like big picture, general, synthesis, summative sort of things, right? So if you have a question like, what are good objectives for media literacy class for teachers? Well, probably it's real hackable for students. I'm going to show my students this too. But then I wanted them to answer a question I asked my students early on, which is, what does it mean to critically evaluate media sources? And it produced this thing that looks fine. Like, it sounds good. It sounds like college writing, but it's sort of empty, right? Doesn't have much specific information. It kind of speaks in generalities. This would be like a C for my students. So I expect more of a 4,000 level class from this. So my students have to incorporate the 5 key questions from the Center for Media Literacy when they think about evaluating. So I asked them to do that. So I put the response back in, I asked them to do that, and this is what it created, right? So like, all it did was like, here are the questions. Here's the response that's in shorter form. So when I say it's not great at incorporating things specifically, this is what I mean. Like, my students, I think it would take my students right now, wait until everyone's more familiar with it, but longer to get a good response from like continuing to interrogate the system than just to write the dang thing, because we talk about it so much. And that's what we're seeing across other institutions as well. The students are like, I just want to write it. Like, I don't want to mess with this. And then finally, I wanted them to include the Potter textbook, which is a really famous, like, the media literacy textbook for teachers. And it includes it. It says, according to the Potter textbook, which would not be cool in APA, right? And then this is not what it talks about. Like this is, it's made up in a really general way. There's no page number. Like I expect quotes because I want close reading. All those things are not there. So this was instructive to me to be like, okay, when can I use it? And maybe even play with my students using it and these general things. And when do I show them like it's not going to get to what you want? Or maybe it can with lots of prodding, but like just spend your time writing it.
And Christy, this is where I think, I've had a couple interactions with instructors in the last several weeks where this would be a great teaching opportunity for you to do a think aloud. That, you know, if I were to assign this and this is what I get, this is how I read and make sense of it. And I think students would really benefit from that, because otherwise, if they give you kind of a crappy version of something, if they don't have that chance to hear from you, it's just going to help them understand more of what you do expect. So I can see that being useful.
Agreed. I'm gonna say this definitely for the fall when I teach this class. Amy has some more ideas.
And I'm going to make this really fast because I want you to get to the last two parts. Sure. So we did go back into some of our archives with some great WI assignments. Again, going back even several years to see some of the things we pulled out that we like to share. And this is again, continuing with this idea of don't reinvent the wheel, just tweak. And that connecting to local places, current issues, Christy mentioned before, connecting student writing to specific course texts, lectures, speakers, whatever, something that's really unique to your students' work. Here's an example, Ben Schwartz, he's now retired, but he was on the board. And I always loved reading his assignments when his courses would come through. They would change. You know, we do ask for courses to be renewed each, you know, add whatever changes you're making to the course each semester, and he would do that. So here's an example, assignment 1 from environmental analysis. Compare and contrast the characteristics of Stanley Hall and Stewart Hall. He would send his students to actually analyze places here on campus, or maybe it'd be the public library. Each semester it would change. And so he's asking them to, again, be very local and then to bring in things from chapter 1. So again, it'd be really hard to go into ChatGPT and put that prompt in. The second prompt there for this is, what is the role of ornament in architecture? Well, that might be something I could put into ChatGPT, but then as it goes on, he says, he's listing out some things. He said, you may want to include some combination of these ideas. And then if a 4th text were added to chapter 2, what would that argument be? And again, that's going to be something that you're pretty unique. That's going to require something very specific to that course in that text. So, Christy.
So we're just going back to the WI guidelines since we are the WI people. And these are some of our 2 big philosophical questions. So anytime we have writing assignments that are sequenced, scaffolded, and distributed throughout the semester, we produce better writing, and it makes it harder for them to, or maybe less attractive is the word I'm looking for them to use the AI writing tools. And then again, we're thinking a lot about process. So harkening back to what Amy said early on, writing intensive or good writing instruction in general isn't writing a lot. It's writing really focused in an iterative process of writing, like we all do on our own manuscripts. And I couldn't, we talked about not including this, and I was like, Amy, what if I just include 1 slide? So this is my 1 slide. I think some folks are like, don't want to even bring it into the classroom because I do not want to open that can of worms, which absolutely, we recognize that. If you are interested in thinking about how to use it, this is one of the Teaching for Learning Centers I've learned a favorite podcast. It is great, T for Teaching, and they have a ChatGPT episode that's really, really good. I took lots of excellent notes from it and got some good ideas of how to actually use the AI writing tool in classes. And these are people who are across the disciplines and very knowledgeable. So you can actually put your lecture notes in there, or students can put their lecture notes in there and ask the program to synthesize and organize it, and it does it. And I was like, how cool is that? Because we know students often take lots of notes and then never do anything with them again, or don't know how to study from them, right? So I think that is really cool. I don't teach lecture classes because I'm real bad at it, but if you do, perhaps that's a way to do it. It also, as we saw, generates great questions and great objectives. So if we ask them to take the notes and then generate exam questions to help them study, so kind of like a self-studying model, I think could be useful. They also have writing studies folks talk about the ways that ChatGPT can help generate ideas at the invention stage. So often students are writing about things that they don't know a lot about, or they only know about vaguely. so they can start to sort of get some general themes and ideas from that. And it also, as we saw in the first 2 sessions from Teaching for Learning Center, it shifts voice beautifully. It can shift something into a Taylor Swift song or a Dr. Seuss voice. And so I do lots of work with shifting voice with my graduate student writers. And this is a way that I think that they could really start to see how that impacts the meaning of the text. I also saw this tweet the other night when I was supposed to be working on this, but I was scrolling Twitter instead. And she said that she helped a grad student brainstorm research questions based on her variables. I was like, that is brilliant. And then even refine research questions. And I don't know how we feel about number 2. That's pretty far. I don't know. But she had ChatGPT write a letter of support for an award by copying award criteria and nominee info, and then she just adjusted it. I'm like, no, I don't know how I feel about that. But we know faculty are also using this to write, grant reports, those things everyone hates writing, and other more sort of formulaic writing.
So as we bring our time to a close, we did want to go back to some of the early days of writing across the curriculum. James Britton did research looking at the kind of writing that was being done in schools. We're talking way back in the 60s and 70s. And he was the one that put together this continuum to think about the writing that goes on in our classrooms, along a continuum then from informal to formal writing. And in our time together, we've done a little bit of informal writing, but then thought about how that could move towards formal writing. So it's something I want us to consider as we tweak assignments and look at our courses. Are we giving opportunities for students to have those kind of ungraded informal writing things before they would fall into a graded kind of writing? Are they having opportunities to have that messy thinking stage in writing before it's in a polished stage? And especially if we're in our upper level courses with some pretty complex new vocabulary, students need time to rehearse that language and practice it and figure out what does these ideas mean? How do they work together? Are we giving them that opportunity from that pre-writing, early writing, inventing phase before we expect a finished document? And by, again, scaffolding that learning along the way so that students, it's going to take them more time to try and pull in an AI-generated text than just to create it themselves. Are we giving opportunities to explore, experiment with things, and then also to have something that's presentational, something that we actually share with others, from private self-writing to public audience. So lots of things to think about in our teaching that we can move through that continuum in ways to support students in learning. So we do hope as you are leaving our time together, you take with you some real intentions for what you want to do. An assignment to tweak, a strategy to try, how you might involve students. Before I left today, I was talking to our student that works with us in the Conley House. She's an undergrad in a biochemistry class right now, Dr. Folk. And so I was asking her about this and she started talking all. So it was just so fun to talk with our students about how they are understanding or curious about, concerned about, all those things. And then like we talked about how else might you use the technology. We are, of course, here all the time and able to talk with you. And I know each of you are coming from different disciplines. So if you want to reach out for an individual consultation to look at your assignments, we would be happy to meet with you on that and go through some specific ideas. So all of our contact information is on there. Also, if you have future session ideas, please let us know. We've got, I think, Kevin, do you have your date set for your session?
We don't have the date set, but it's, I may do more than one, but the one that I know I would like to do, and we just have to schedule, is about blue sky thinking and creativity and sort of talking about ChatGPT in the context of what it can and what it can't do from a creative and arts perspective. And also reassuring people that like as a creative artist, like you won't be replaced. Like, and actually all of you won't be replaced. It's just another form of technology that we need to learn and build on, and it's going to be here. So
be on the lookout for Kevin's, the date for his session or more sessions.
TBA.
And then Cheryl.
March 8th at 11. It's called Process as AI Intervention, using the writing process to engage with your students' writing and learning. So we're going to build on some of the stuff that Christy was talking about in terms of the writing process, talk about the benefits of it and some strategies to really get to know your students as they write so that there's less fear of seeing a computer generated text.
Alex says I would be interested in a session on how to use Power Notes in assignments.
And Power Notes, I think we will be setting a date for Power Notes as well as some other possible library resources. So be on the lookout for that one. And do let us know if there's some topics that you haven't seen come up because we're still setting dates and topics throughout the semester. We will also be bringing in some speakers at Celebration of Teaching Excellence Week at the end of April. So that will also be a way to bring some things together. I know some of you on Zoom also are putting together some plans. We all have a lot to learn from one another. So please, if you've got an idea or something to involve students, which would be really cool, let's hope we can do that. That would be good. I know it's already a little after 3. I just want to thank you all. The video, the slides will be available for you. And we look forward to just continuing these conversations. But thanks for this time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Will the slides just be posted on